welcome to Addis Dialogue. My esteemed guest today is the former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, Ambassador Tibor Nagy, the former American Foreign Service officer. Ambassador Nagy also served as the U.S. Ambassador to Guinea and Ethiopia, where he contributed a lot as the U.S. diplomat, of course, with the program. And Chiparalago, do service. Ambassador, so good to see you. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for making the time to talk.
Of course, and thank you so much for having me. And I have to remind people, I am not speaking on behalf of the U.S. government. The
All
views
right.
are my own.
Understood, sir. Understood. Thank you. So let me jump right into the first question, Ambassador. One of the new developments we have witnessed in Ethiopia recently was the fact that Ethiopia has stated its stance that it wants to have access to Cialis in an amicable way in order to properly meet the demands of the growing population and also accommodate the growing economy of the East African nation. I know you have been following this new development, Ambassador Naz, which is really appreciable. So, what have you made out of Ethiopia's overall move to have access to Cialis?
Yeah, from my point of view, I am a huge supporter of the deal. It involves two of my favorite countries, Ethiopia and Somaliland, and in many respects, it's a perfect deal for both of them. I mean, and your listeners know better than I do, Ethiopia's very long historical efforts to have a seaport. The ancient nation had it. Then during medieval times, the Ottoman Empire moved down and took over the sea. Then some of the European colonizers took over various countries. So there's always been a struggle. And today, Ethiopia is the largest, most populous nation that's landlocked. So obviously it needs a ready access to the sea. So why not with a peaceful deal with the nation of Somaliland? And Somaliland in many respects is one of the most stable countries in the region. Every single country, of course, has some of its own internal problems, but if you look at Somaliland overall, it's a very stable and peaceful country. And just as Ethiopia desperately needs to have a peaceful access to the sea, Somaliland desperately needs some type of official diplomatic recognition. So it's it is, as the Chinese like to say, a win-win proposition.
So talking about Somaliland, Ambassador, as you know, part of this new development was the MOU signed between Ethiopia and Somaliland, which will provide Ethiopia with the opportunity to have access to a port. So what does this mean to Ethiopia and Somaliland specifically?
We talked about the bilateral advantages, both to Ethiopia and to Somaliland. But then also look at the regional dynamics and how positive this would be. We know that the Red Sea has terrible instability problems, whether it is piracy, because Somalia cannot control its coastal waters, or now the Houthis that are shooting rockets at ships going through the Red Sea. I mean, Ethiopia as a major nation, if it had a port, if it had a navy again, it could absolutely contribute to the stability of the Red Sea. And it could also provide training, for example, to the Somaliland Navy, which does have a small navy, but they could certainly use the benefits of training from a much larger country. So we don't know what is in the MOU. People talk about it, but nobody really knows what's in it. But what we do know for sure is that an MOU it's not a final document. It's what we would call, it's aspirational. It says that it intends to do X, Y, and Z. So, all we know is that allegedly the deal would be for 50 years for X number of kilometers, of sea access and a naval port, maybe. but we don't know what the final agreement's going to be. That has to be decided between, Ethiopia and Somaliland. But the aspirational aspects themselves are extremely positive.
However, right in the aftermath of the signing of the MOU, we have been hearing all sorts of negative narratives surrounding this agreement between Ethiopia and Somaliland. So I want to ask you this question, sir. How should the region handle the situation, especially in a win-win approach?
Yeah, it's interesting, the reactions, because everyone who has been having what I call a snit fit over this deal has their own unique reasons, for doing that. I mean, from the African Union's point of view, let's be honest, there are countries in there in the African Union which are worried about having separatist movements within their own countries. The United States of America has this policy with which I very strongly disagree, called the One Somalia policy, where basically the United States says that Somaliland, is part of Somalia. My view, it is not, it never has been, and it should not be, but, that's neither here nor there. The Egyptians, we know, have their own problems with Ethiopia over the GERD. So anything that Ethiopia does which is positive, the Egyptians will probably be against it, even though this deal would be very much in Egypt's interest, because if you have stability in the Red Sea, then you get more ships going through the Suez Canal. So at the end of the day, Egypt, but as I said, these countries are, jumping up and down in protest for their own selfish reasons. It has nothing to do with a deal which would benefit the region. I mean, the joke of it all is Somalia itself. You have a president of a quote unquote country which cannot even control its own territory. It is depending on Ethiopia's forces to provide some of the counterterrorism measures inside Somalia. And, the president of Somalia is talking about going to war with Ethiopia. I mean, let's get serious. That is a huge joke, but it's a tragic joke.
What's really saddening is, I think, the media also, there are lots of media outlets that are trying to tarnish the image of Ethiopia, the image of this signing of a memorandum of understanding also, saying all sorts of negative things. Do you have any comment on that?
Well, again, everybody who's criticizing the deal has their own reasons for criticizing it. Some people are going to criticize the deal because they don't like the prime minister. Again, this should not be looked at as personal. It doesn't matter who the specific leaders are. What matters, is it in the national interest of Ethiopia? Is it in the national interest of Somaliland? Is it in the interest of the Horn of Africa? Is it in the interest of the larger region? And the answer to all of those is yes. It is in everybody's interest, whether they want to admit it or not. At the end of the day, it's even in Somalia's interest, whether they want to admit it or not, because if you bring a greater deal of stability to the Red Sea and the coastal waters, that will cut down on the piracy, which is going on off the coast of Somalia.
Thank you, Ambassador, for that idea. As you know, given the growing population and the economy of Ethiopia, many say Ethiopia needs more than one port, and as such, it has to diversify its port access. To what extent is this reasonable and possible in your view?
Well, of course it's reasonable, because no one wants to depend on a monopoly. Right now, fundamentally, Djibouti has the upper hand, because you have what amounts to a small city-state, which is controlling the lifeline to a country of, what are we now at with Ethiopia, 130 million people, say? So, of course Ethiopia would like to diversify its port access. I mean, you look at a country with that many people, limited to one port with one thin railroad line, then, that's not very promising. I visited Somaliland. I visited the fantastic port of Berbera, and I saw the new road that is, heading to eastern Ethiopia, and it makes a huge amount of logical sense.
The other issue that I really want your idea on is, in addition to having access to a port, Ethiopia has also shown its interest to have a naval presence in the Red Sea. So what do you make out of this move? How should different countries respond to this move?
Well, again, Ethiopia is not going to be attacking anybody. It makes sense if a country has access to the sea, it makes sense for that country to have a navy for, protecting shipping, for adding stability, for training other countries. And, historically, larger countries tend to have bigger navies, and larger countries have more resources, and they would help smaller countries, with training, with academies and things like that. So again, Ethiopia having a navy in the Red Sea, in my view, would promote the stability of the sea. It would not be negative. Ethiopia is not a belligerent country that is going to be attacking other countries. So to me, it's a positive development. It's positive development for security. It's positive development for commerce, and it's a positive development for everybody.
I have already finished my questions, and thanks so much for those ideas. Maybe finally, if you have any message that you want to convey, the floor is all yours.
Well, no, my only message is, I am a huge believer in not in the long-term prosperity and stability of Ethiopia, and of Ethiopia being one of the most important countries, frankly, on earth. And, I have no doubts that Ethiopia has a prosperous future ahead. There are currently some very, very serious problems that it needs to get over, but I'm sure that it will. And the Ethiopian people, more than anything else, need to determine their own future. They have to, have some type of reconciliation, and they need to decide what state the nation should take moving forward. And, I have every belief that the people will be able to do that.
Yes, sir. Ambassador Naz, thank you so much for your ideas, and also for following the new developments happening in the Horn of Africa, and for contributing here to the development.
Thanks, Otto Schäfer. Take care. All the best.
Well, viewers, with that, we come to the end of today's program. Thank you as well for having been with us so far. Until I see you next time with yet another program. It's a bye.